Shalom Aleichem. We're reviewing the Sicha, Bechukosai Chelek Sicha number 3. The Sicha goes by the rule of Noatz Tchilasan B'Seifam B'Seifam B'Tchilasan. The end is rooted in the beginning, and the beginning in the end, which is often perhaps part of the reason for the customs that when a person finishes a book of Torah, you connect the end to the beginning. The Rebbe would often make a siyum on various tractates of the Talmud, of Shas, and elaborate on the last section, the last Mishnah, the last statement in that tractate, and link it to the first. That's what a hadron is. Hadron means really to review. When you finish a book of the Torah, we say we're going to review and also find the connection between the beginning and the end, all based on that principle that the end is rooted in the beginning and vice versa. Says the Rebbe, we're finishing the book of Leviticus. It's a seal. And therefore, there has to be a connection between the beginning and the end of the book. Furthermore, within the last parsha itself, Bechukosai, there needs to be a connection between the beginning and end of that parsha. So we already have three things to connect: the beginning of Leviticus, Vayikra, the end of the whole book, Vayikra, and the beginning of the last portion of Bechukosai. Those three things should be linked. And then the Rebbe takes it further. And the Rebbe says, what about the Hasidic parsha? We know that Alter Rebbe wrote a monumental work called the Likutei Torah and Torah Oid, which they represent the Hasidic portion, so to speak, known in Yiddish as the Hasidic parsha. And the Rebbe strongly encouraged that we should try to study it each week. It's quite an undertaking to try to do it on a regular basis. But, and this is fundamental. Much of Hasidus is rooted in those books. And in fact, Hasidim would say that Tanya is like the Bible of Hasidus, and the Likutei Torah, Torah Eid, that is like the Talmud, the Shas of Hasidus. It's all in there. Says the Rebbe that we have to find a link to the beginning and end of that book, of the Hasidic parsha, beginning of the Leviticus Vayikra, the end of Vayikra, and the beginning of Bechukosai, within the Hasidic parsha, within the book of the Likutei Torah. And the Rebbe takes it further and says, well, since there's also an addendum to that book, at the end of Bechukosai, there's an addendum of additional Ma'amarim. That end also has to match and be linked to the others, which is fascinating because that and the addendum was added much later in the times that the Frierdiker Rebbe was printed. But by the Rebbe, everything is Hashgacha Pratis and certainly a Torah book. And now the book has not only an end in Bechukosai, but it has an end in the addendum, and that has to match the theme. So in total, the Rebbe is trying to find connections between 7 different things. In the Chumash itself, the beginning and end of the book, and the beginning of the portion of Vayikra, of Bechukosai, so that's 3. And then in Likutei Torah, the beginning and end of the book, the beginning of Bechukosai, and the addendum. As you could see in my little chart, these are the 7 things that we are trying to connect. So the Rebbe comes along first to connect the 3 sections of the Torah itself. So the Rebbe says that the theme between the beginning and end of the entire book of Vayikra, we see right away they're very similar. Namely, that they both speak of the idea that there's certain Kedusha, holiness that God brings to us, and certain Kedusha that we respond with from our side. So let's start with the end of the book. The last discussion of the book of Vayikra is about the korban, the sacrifice of 2 sacrifices, Bechor, the firstborn, and Meiser, the tithing of the herd. And that's how the book ends. Incidentally, the book begins also with sacrifices. There's much sacrifices throughout the entire book of Vayikra. But because it ends with these 2 sacrifices specifically, there's something interesting. Bechor, firstborn, is something that Hashem makes holy. It's automatic, it's inborn. It happens to be a firstborn. It's a holy animal. Whereas the 10th, the tithing of the herd, this is something that the owner made holy. It's not automatic. You have to take all the sheep or cattle, whatever it is, put them into a pen and walk them out and then mark the 10th one. So you make it holy. And there's all kinds of laws in halacha. What if I marked by accident the ninth one and I called the 10th or the 8th one or the 11th? So that the holiness only takes hold by virtue of my action of proclaiming it as such. Says the Rebbe, so the Chumash is ending with that 2 sides, so to speak, of the coin. Hashem makes certain things holy. These things are intrinsically holy. And then Hashem empowers us, the Jewish people, Bnei Yisrael, to in turn sanctify things from our side. Says the Rebbe, that's very similar to the theme with which the entire book begins. The book begins the opening verse, second verse, Adam ki yakriv mikem karban Hashem, a man who will bring forth a sacrifice to Hashem. Min abhema, min abokar, min atzayin. You should bring it from the ox, from the sheep. Shall you bring your offerings? So on a simple level, it means if you want to bring an offering, here are the choices. You can bring an ox, you can bring a sheep. But in Chassidus, it's explained that this verse is speaking about God's relationship to us and our response to that relationship. It's hinted in the fact that the grammar is a little off, so to speak. First of all, it says a man who will sacrifice from you. It should really say a man from amongst you who will sacrifice, hinting to the fact that we're talking about the sacrifice from you, for the person. The Hebrew word sacrifice, carbon, really means etymologically, it means to bring close, and it really means to bring yourself close to Hashem. The other thing is that the first half of the verse is singular, the second half is plural. Adam ki yakriv mikem carbon Hashem, a man who will bring from you carbon, sacrifice, closeness to God, a man, a single. And what's the second half of the verse? That from the ox and the sheep, takrivu es karbanchem, shall you, plural, bring your offerings, plural. How does it switch? From the Chassidic level, the first half of the verse is a reference to God, the supernal man. Adam shalakise, the supernal man, Adam Elyon. The second half of the verse is a reference to us, his children, the Jewish people. And what the verse is saying is that often Hashem inspires us from above, and our job is then to respond from below. So Adam, the man, the supernal man, when God, Yakir Mikem, he'll try to bring from you, he'll try to elevate you close to him. That's why it's singular. The reaction should be that we should bring our animal close to Hashem, and that's why it's plural. A, it refers to all of us, and B, Chassidus explains it refers to bringing not only the divine soul, but also the animal soul, and it's pluralistic. Bottom line is that first verse, that first message in the beginning of the book about Yikra according to Chassidus, mirrors very closely the closing of the book, namely this top-down, bottom-up type of response. Hashem initiates, and we respond. Hashem will try to inspire us. Adam ki yakri mikem, Hashem will try to bring you close. What should you do? You should respond, and you'll become close. Just like the end of the book, you have Bechor, which Hashem makes holy, and you have Meiser, the tithing of the herd, which you make holy. So far, it's very clean and neat. And then the Rebbe wants to connect it, this same theme, to the beginning of the portion of Bechukosai. But in order to do that, the Rebbe prefaced the following. These two sacrifices, the firstborn and the tithing, in addition to the fact what they mean in terms of our relationship to God, firstborn is from Hashem, holiness, tithing is our holiness, they also can be translated within this neshama itself. The neshama has both sides. The neshama has the essence of the soul, which is like the firstborn. The soul is holy. So nefesh elokis is the divine soul. It feels kedusha, and that the address for that would be chachma shebenefesh, the level of chachma, which is a vessel and a vehicle to receive, to carry the truth of Hashem in it. The part of the soul that's just holy. It's not something that you feel and that you make choices. You're yit, you're holy. Conversely, the tithing of the herd, this represents the part of our neshama where we have to make choices to be holy. And that's why it's called tithing. First of all, tithing means that there's 10, which represents the 10 characters of the soul, not chachma, which is really a vessel for the essence of the soul itself, which is intrinsically holy and doesn't get contaminated. No, we're talking about the 10 levels of the soul. Here it is all kind of details, and the person makes choices to do the right thing. And specifically, not even all 10, but we're speaking about the tithing, the last one. And what's the last one? Of all the 10 characters of the neshama, malchus, which means the practical expression of the neshama, which expresses itself actually in the garments of the soul, thought, speech, and action. So here we have the two sides, two extremes of the neshama's relationship to holiness. On the one hand, we have the firstborn of the neshama, which is the soul, the essence of the soul, which is just holy. It's just the divinity gifted to us just because we're Jewish, just because they're the children of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And then we have the tithing, namely the final lowest level of the soul, the 10th level of the soul, thought, speech, and action, where we make our choices every day and every minute of every day. And that's something that hopefully we make holy, but that's our choice. That's like a tithing where we contribute to that service. Now that the Rebbe has personalized these two sides of it within the neshama itself, the Rebbe connects it to the beginning of the portion of Bechukosai. What does the beginning of the portion of Bechukosai? The first line, Hashem says to the Jewish people, "Im Bechukosai telechu v'mitzvosai tishmeru," if or please follow my statutes, walk in my statutes, and guard my mitzvahs. Hashem is asking and beseeching the Jewish people to follow Torah mitzvahs. It seems to be a double expression. On the face of it, the statutes, Bechukosai speaks to the mitzvahs that are super rational. Mitzvosai speaks to the mitzvahs that are more rational. There's obviously many, many interpretations how that's not a duplication. But in Chassidus, in the context of the soul, the first half of the verse is speaking to the essence. The second half of the verse is speaking to the revealed self where you have choices. The first half of the verse, Bechukosai, means statutes, which means, it comes from the word chukim, mitzvahs that are super rational, but really chukim also is the root of engraved, the part of your soul which is engraved within Hashem. It is literally one with Hashem, and it's just holy. Of course it follows the will of Hashem. It wants nothing else. It really doesn't have much of a choice. And that's why even when it comes down to mitzvahs, it embraces mitzvahs that it doesn't understand with the same joy as mitzvahs that it does, because its connection to Hashem is intrinsic and essential. Whereas the second half of the verse, you will guard my mitzvahs, this refers to the part of the neshama which, so to speak, struggles with the decisions, and it needs to guard the mitzvahs. It has to make sure to do the right thing, lest it fall prey to not doing the mitzvah, or God forbid doing a sin, and therefore that refers to the lower levels of the soul. So now this beginning of Bechukosai mirrors perfectly the same theme of the end of Bechukosai, namely these two levels of the soul that we talked about earlier. So far we put together those three, the beginning of Vayikra, the end of Vayikra, the beginning of Bechukosai. And in one word, what is it? The same theme. The message that Hashem shines down holiness to us, and then we respond with our holiness. And we had that in all three places. Now the Rebbe moves on to explain the connection, and here we have the four connections, on the Chassidish parsha, on the Kutatera. When you learn Chassidus, Chassidus always takes the soul of the matter and takes it different and takes it deeper and takes it and inverts it, so to speak. So when you come along and look in the Chassidish parsha, wouldn't you know it? It's the exact opposite. Whereas so far we're talking about the relationship that we have with Hashem, that Hashem inspires and we respond. Hashem makes it holy and we do our little bit. On the Chassidish parsha, the theme is going to be, the message is going to be the exact opposite. But the truth is, what's greater in the relationship is not when Hashem responds and gives, or Hashem initiates, but when we respond. That is actually a greater part of the relationship. I'm calling it, just to be simple and concise, not the top-down message, but the bottom-up message, meaning to say that's where it's at. That there's a greater advantage, so to speak, in our response, as poor and as humble as it might be, even over the great holiness that Hashem brings to us as a gift. And that becomes the theme of the Chassidish parsha in all four. Let's take a look. The beginning of Vayikra and the Chassidish parsha explains. Remember, we learned that what is the beginning of Vayikra according to Chassidus? Hashem inspires a person. It's called the Sirusa de La'ela, an inspiration from above. Sometimes a person will just feel inspired. They won't know why they're inspired. Just feel it. Hashem gave them a gift. And then the person's reaction should be, Sirusa de Latata, they should respond in kind. And he explains there that if we don't respond quickly and do our part to internalize the inspiration, it will go away. It's almost like if it starts to rain, but you didn't plow the fields, nothing's going to happen. And therefore, it's true at times Hashem will inspire you. Make sure to immediately respond and do your part in order for this higher inspiration to have staying power, to be real, because otherwise it will not be internalized within the person. So here already you have the theme that where is the greater advantage, not so much in the inspiration from above, but in the response from below. We have this also in the beginning of Bechukosai. It's not enough in the Likutei Torah, he explains that it's not enough to rely on the fact that you're neshama, the level of your soul that's engraved within Hashem, and that as one with Hashem, feels Hashem and wants to do the mitzvahs, and wants to do everything that Hashem wants. That's not enough. Where is it really at? When you actually physically guard the mitzvahs and do the mitzvahs, not somewhere in the essence of your soul and on high, but right here, down here, where there's a struggle and there are choices, and you actually have to guard it. And that's where it's at, says the Alter Rebbe, in the Likutei Torah, the beginning of Bechukosai. What's a greater thing? What's a greater level? What's a greater advantage and accomplishment? That actually guards the Bechukosai Telechu, that guards the first half of the verse. In plain English, your service of Hashem down here in the body with its struggles and its choices, as simple as it might seem, as lowly, so to speak, as it might seem, is actually greater and is what guarantees and what gives staying power to the essence of the soul to experience its essential bond. The same theme again of the advantage of our input versus that which is gifted to us. The theme continues at the end of Bechukosai and Likutei Torah, where the Alter Rebbe there explains a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos chapter 3, which the Mishnah says, a person should meditate on three things, he'll never sin. And what are the three things? Me'ayin basa, from where you come, la'anat ha'helech, from where you go, and before whom you'll have to give a reckoning. On a simple level, the Mishnah is saying that be humble. You came from nothing, you go back to the dirt, etc. But according to Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe explains, look at the verbiage. There's much hinted here. Me'ayin basa, you come from nothing. The word ayin is used. Where you're going, here we use the word on, we don't use the word ayin. And it's explained in the Likutei Torah. Ayin is an allusion to spiritual lofty levels. Ayin, more than nothing, ayin means it's beyond, it's transcendent. It's ayin, meaning we define it as, what is it? We don't know, it's beyond. It's a very high level. The level of ayin represents lofty levels. We tell the soul, we want you. So the Hasidic interpretation of this Mishnah would be what inspires a person not to sin. Not me'ayin basa, from where you come from dust, from a putrid drop, but rather me'ayin basa, from where you come from ayin, you come from Hashem, such a lofty place in ruchnius and in elikus, in elikus, in godliness, that is called ayin, which is so beyond this world. It's to us, it's like ayin, we're like yesh me'ayin, it's totally transcendent and beyond, and therefore it inspires the yid to treasure that neshama and not tarnish it with sin, God forbid. And then we say, la'anat ha'helech, and where are you going? Here, again, on the Hasidic level, it represents the greater reward, which will be when we have after Mashiach, Tchias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead. La'on is a reference to the physical world. It's the opposite of ayin. It's on. Because ultimately, the great reward is not in heaven, but the great, real, ultimate reward is in the time of resurrection. And why so? Because since our service of Hashem is done in the physical world, the reward ultimately should be in the same place, the same setting as the mitzvah was done. And therefore, ultimately, the reward will be to neshama in a body in this physical world, as expressed in the word on. And the Alter Rebbe explains there that as lofty as ayin is, as lofty as heaven is, the source of the neshama, and the higher oilamus, the higher realms, it's fantastic, it's transcendent, it's infinite, it's great. There's a tremendous advantage and an infinite advantage to the place of resurrection in this physical world when the neshama and guf together will experience Hashem. It's much greater than all of that. So again, the same thing. The connection between the advantage of the lower world and the lower inspiration, the lower service right here in the physicality, even over the highest realms of spirituality. And finally, this same theme is expressed in the addendum. And he talks about the holidays at the end of the addendum, and what's considered the greatest of the holidays, of course, Yom Kippur. And why is it the greatest of the holidays? Because we're so in touch with Hashem, with the lakus, with godliness, that we don't have to eat. Yom Kippur, we're supposed to fast, not because because we're being sad. It's not a sad day. It's been said that, one of the Polish Rebbes would say, on Tisha B'Av, who can eat? On Yom Kippur, who wants to eat? The fast is not about the fact that I'm sad. The fast is about the fact that a person is so in touch with Hashem on that day, and therefore, who wants to eat? The language is l'chayos barav. They live from hunger. They don't need to eat. A person, a yid, on that day is on such a level where they feel Hashem, and the pleasure comes from the essential bond with Hashem. It's a lofty level. It's higher than any other day. It's fantastic. You don't have to eat. You're one with Hashem. What could be greater? Comes along the Alter Rebbe at the end of this addendum and says, you want to know what's greater? The actual peak and pinnacle of all the holidays, which is Shmini Atzeres. When here we eat and we drink and there's a great simcha and physical joy in the physical body. And yet that's even greater because ultimately this is exactly the same theme, that ultimately what's greater even than heaven is earth. What's greater even than the inspiration that Hashem gives and that we have essentially from above within our souls as gifted is that which we accomplish right here in the physical earth and the physical world through our service. And that becomes the theme of these 4 points in the Likutei Torah, in the Chassidish Parsha. The Rebbe in the Sicha explains, even though the Sicha is based on a Maimer, in the Sicha this deep concept is touched upon somewhat at length. How do we make sense of this second half of the Sicha? The first half of the Sicha, I understand. That we get inspiration from above and we react. But clearly the inspiration from above is much greater. But when you talk about the second half of the Sicha, where we're turning it on its head and saying that according to Chassidish, where is it at? It's in the physical, and it's in our service, and it's right here, down here on earth, etc. How does that make any sense? How could physical be greater than spiritual? So just to touch upon it, the Rebbe explains it on a few levels, and I'm not going to do justice to it, but just making a couple of points. Number one is because without our response to Hashem's inspiration, the inspiration won't last. So that's a practical way. But then the Rebbe digs further. And the Rebbe says that the purpose of Hashem's creation, the purpose of Hashem's whole plan is Dina B'Tachtenim. And therefore, ultimately, doing the service of Hashem right here on earth, as simple, so to speak, as lowly as it might be, is greater than all the higher realms, the spiritual realms, Ilm Hasayenim. I mean, these are infinite worlds and unbelievable. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's all about Hashem's purpose, Hashem's essence. What is Kavanas Atzmos? What is his purpose? Dina B'Tachtenim. And that's what he wants. That's the goal. You know, on a very mundane level, somebody could open a business. And the business has many levels of workers and management and upper management and everything else. It's all different levels. You might be analogous to the 4 worlds and the higher worlds and Olam Hasei and Sof, the infinite worlds. And then there is the purpose, the mission of the whole thing, which is the owner and his family, that they should make a living, period. So all these are wonderful levels. You know, I mean, you come from the mail room, you know, from the lower level, and you go higher to the higher level of management and the boardroom. It's all wonderful and fine. But when it comes to the owner's child, that's the whole purpose of the whole business. The whole purpose, the kavana, the goal, is the B'Tachtenim, which is right here on earth. And therefore, ultimately, nothing can be higher, nothing can even come close to the closest we have to Hashem when we serve him right here on earth in the physical. Or to use the language that's employed in the Sicha. The difference when you talk about Giluyim, revelations, or lights from Hashem, or you talk about the essence. When you talk about lights, a light decreases as it goes further away from the source. So there's a very big difference between lower levels, the way the light of Hashem is felt in this world, the way it's felt in the spiritual world, and the way it's felt in the divine world. And on that level, the higher you go, the closer you are, the greater you are. So there's this world, there's the world of the angels, and then there's the world of the souls, and then there's the world of Elokus, Atzilus. And obviously each one is greater, infinitely greater. But this is all about revelation, the light. And the nature of light is that the further away it goes from the source, the less it becomes. Obvious. But then there's the essence itself. And the essence doesn't go any further away. So just to give a plain example for this, when you take a look at a person, what's the light? The light is the way others perceive it. So let's use an example. I'm looking at a person, but I'm not seeing the person himself. I'm seeing him in a photograph. That's a reflection of him. But obviously, it's a very distant reflection. It's a photograph. Maybe I could see him in a mirror. It's a closer reflection. It moves when he does. But clearly, it's not him. It's very close, very nice. But it's not him. A higher level might be when I actually look at the person. Wow, that's great. I'm looking at the person. But at the end of the day, it's still not the person. I'm just looking at the person, which means you're seeing his light, his reflection, his extension, his revelation. What about the person himself? Can't capture him in the picture. You can't capture him in a mirror. You can't even capture him by looking at him because you're seeing his visibility. How do you capture the person? But what if you're the person's son? That's him. And that would be a very plain example to this whole conversation. That the neshama, every one of us is told, you should know you come from a very lofty place and you have chachma shebenefesh and you have the essence and you have very high levels and it's engraved within Hashem and etc. You come from ayin, you come from these levels of infinity which represent very high levels. But you want to know where you touch Hashem, when you come down to the physical and do the mitzvah. And that's where the ultimate ches hamesim and the ultimate reward, the ultimate purpose, right here on earth, in a physical body. Really, this is so lowly and so plain, so mundane. That's where Hashem's purpose is. Or in the language of the metaphor. On the higher levels, the soul is a reflection of Hashem, just like the light of the picture, or of the mirror, or of the glimpse of his face, of the radiance of his face. It's not him. Whereas you take a yid down here in a physical body and you touch him, you're touching Hashem. What is a yid? It's an embodiment of Hashem. Literally, like a child is an embodiment of a parent. We understand it's only by metaphor, because ultimately, we talk about Hashem's essence, it's infinitely greater and different, but just by metaphor. And therefore we can understand that being in a physical body, and it's so distant, so to speak, it's so dark, it's so not revealed, etc. But we're not talking about revelation. We're not trying to get a better glimpse of his face. We're trying to get him himself. And you don't get any closer than the physicality of a yid here on earth doing Teda mitzvahs, and which is manifest and completed at the end of the plan of creation. The Rebbe says this same theme in the story of the stone on the beginning of the line of Bechukosai. The mitzvahs and the soul, the way it's engraved within a stone, it's a very high level. You have letters that are written, ink on parchment. You can separate them. That's a lower level of connection. The letters that are ingrained and engraved within a stone, much higher level. So these two levels would be two levels of revelation. A lower level where your connection is like ink on paper. It's separable, it's separate, it's additional. It's not exactly one. Then you have where it's ingrained within the stone. Wow, the letters are part of it. That might be an example of the soul, the way it's in heaven, me'ayin. The soul, the way it does mitzvahs in the level of Bechukosai, the level of engraved and ingrained, the higher levels where the soul feels totally attached with the essence. It is one with the essence. But nevertheless, you're still speaking about the soul and God. And the soul is ingrained and engraved within God. There's the stone and there's the letters. They're almost one and the same, but they're still not. Because you can speak of letters engraved within the stone. But then there is the stone itself. And how do you access that stone itself? You access it through the yid doing the mitzvah physically down here on earth, as mentioned earlier. And the same thing is with the Yom Kippur theme. Fasting in Yom Kippur is a very high level. The soul feels one with Hashem, it doesn't need to eat. When a person then gets pleasure from eating and drinking or other external things, so obviously they're distant from source. When they get closer to source, like Yom Kippur, it's a level of the soul, whether we feel it consciously or not, where we don't have to eat. The soul gets pleasure from Hashem. But again, like the stone has the engraved letters, there's still Hashem and there's still you. And you're getting pleasure from an essential bond. There's still a bond. A bond means that there's two things. Comes along a Yid Shminat Tzeres, celebrates the Torah, celebrates Yiddishkeit, celebrates it with eating and drinking, but all in the context of Yiddishkeit. Now he finds Hashem within the physical, within the food, within everything. Because why do you have to run away from that? If Hashem is, the Yid is literally a part of Hashem on that level, as mentioned earlier, and therefore it's all part of Hashem's essence. It's not a revelation, it's not a greater revelation, a closer revelation. It is literally, so to speak, an embodiment, an extension of Hashem's truth, because on the level of Atzmos, everything is part of Hashem, and specifically the Yid and his Simcha that he has, Shmini Atzeres, even in the level of the physical. It's interesting to note, it's not mentioned in the Sicha, but Chassidim would often say the Shmini Atzeres, especially Simchas Torah, were especially precious to Hashem, to the Rebbe. The Rebbe would speak about the fact that each one of the days of Sukkot is we have the 7 Shpizin, and the 7 Chassidish Shpizin was the previous Rebbe Torah, starting from the Baal Shem Tov until the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe himself referred to the Frierdiker Rebbe as the Ushpizin of Shmini Atzeres, not only Ushpizin, but he said he was the host, the Balabas. Very much in line. Again, I'm just adding this, so to speak, on my own nachrayis, that the Frierdiker Rebbe, what was the Frierdiker Rebbe's message? Bringing Yiddishkeit to America, etc. That Shmini Atzeres. You bring the holiness in the physical. And one might say that the Rebbe, of course, Chassidim said that the Rebbe's Shpizin is Simchas Torah, which we saw the Rebbe glowed on that day and radiated in a way which was extraordinary. Because as the Rebbe explains in the Sichas, Simchas Torah is even greater than Shmini Atzeres, because it's the peak of all the Yom Tovim, but there isn't even a sukkah. There isn't even a sukkah as a custom. You go back into the home. You go back into, so to speak, normal life. And there, the Kedusha is there because the Kedusha is ultimately essential. I'm just adding that the central theme of the second half of the Sicha, that the physical expression of Hashem's essence. And right here on earth, we're touching Hashem just by being Yidden and doing Torah mitzvahs, which is his ultimate purpose. This is very much in line with the Rebbe's Shnit and the Rebbe's stated goal of his entire Nesius to immediately, speedily bring us to Dira B'Tachteinim right here on earth.